get better data so you can see what's happening. China's kind of closed. You don't see what's going on in the peasant areas, which are in turmoil. So they have environmental problems. They have huge, hundreds of millions of people who are kind of like at the edge of starvation. We don't have, we have problems, but not those problems. And even the industrial growth, which is there, for a part of the population, there's been improvement. But take, say, India, where we know more. In the areas where high-tech industries developed, and it's pretty impressive. I've visited some of the labs in Hyderabad. It's good or better than MIT. But right nearby, the rate of peasant suicides is going up very sharply, in fact. And it's the same source. It's the neoliberal policies which privilege a certain sector of the population and let the rest take care of themselves.
And yet the rise of progressives in Latin America?
That's important. Latin America, for the first time in 500 years, is moving towards a degree of independence and a kind of integration, which is a prerequisite for independence, and also at least is beginning to face some of its massive internal problems. Latin America has probably the worst inequality in the world. There's a wealthy sector, small wealthy sector, which is extremely rich, but their tradition is that they have no responsibility to the country. So they send their capital to Zurich, they have their second homes in the Riviera, and children study in Oxford or whatever. This is beginning to be faced in different ways, but it's sort of happening all over the continent. And they are beginning to integrate. The United States obviously doesn't like it. In fact, it's barely reported most of the time. So there was a very interesting case last September when President Morales in Bolivia is, in my opinion at least, probably the most democratic country in the world. Nobody says that. But if you look at what happened in the last couple of years, there were huge popular mass organizations of the most repressed population in the hemisphere, the indigenous population, which for the first time ever has entered the political arena significantly, and were able to elect a president from their own ranks, and one who doesn't give instructions to his army, but who's following policies that were largely produced by the population. So he's their representative in a sense in which democracy is supposed to work. And they know the issues. It's not like our elections. They know the issues. They're serious issues: control over resources, economic justice, cultural rights, and so on. You can say they're right or wrong, but at least it's functioning. Now, the elites that have traditionally ruled the country, of course, don't like it. And they're threatening virtual secession. And of course, the United States is backing them, as the media are. And it got to the point last summer, I suppose, where it led to real violence. Well, there was a meeting of UNASUR, the Union of South American Republics, that's all of South America, a meeting in Chile, it was Santiago, Chile, and it came out with a declaration, important declaration, in which it supported President Morales and condemned the violence being led by the quasi-secessionist forces, and Morales responded, thanking them for their gesture of support, but also saying correctly that this is the first time in 500 years that South America is beginning to take its affairs in its own hands without the intervention of foreign powers, primarily the U.S. Well, that was so important that I don't think it was even reported here. The meeting was known, so you see vague references to it. But it's an indication of developments that are taking place in various ways.
Noam Chomsky, you've just hit 80. We just have a few minutes to go. And how does it feel?
I have a few years to go. I don't think about it much.
But as you reflect, talking about these huge social movements, cataclysmic times in the world, your life experience, what gives you hope?
Well, there's both hope and fear. I'm old enough to have grown up in the Depression, and some of my memories, I didn't understand them much at the time. Childhood memories are listening to Hitler's speeches. I didn't understand them, but I could sense the reaction of my parents, and had a feeling of fear, tremendous fear. In fact, the first article I wrote was in 1939 when I was in fourth grade, and it was about the expansion of fascism over Europe, a kind of a dark cloud that may envelop everything. And as I mentioned before, I have some of those same concerns now. On the other hand, there's been tremendous progress. The country's far more civilized than it was, say, 40 years ago, thanks to the activism of the 60s and its aftermath. And some of the most important developments were after the 60s, like, say, the feminist movement, which has probably had more of an impact on the society than any other, is mostly post-60s. The solidarity movements, which are unique in the history of imperialism, there's never been anything like them, that's from the 80s. The global justice movement, what's called anti-globalization, shouldn't be, that's the 90s and this century. These are all very positive developments. They haven't changed the institutions. In fact, the institutions have reacted by becoming harsher, not surprisingly, but they've changed the culture. I mean, take, say, the 2008 election. I mean, I didn't like the candidates, as I've made clear. On the other hand, 40 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago, you couldn't have imagined that the Democratic Party would have two candidates, an African American and a woman. Okay, that's a sign of the civilizing effect of the activism of the 60s and everything that followed. Well, that can be mobilized. In fact, it's already, if you count the number of activists in the country, it's, I suspect, well beyond the 60s, except maybe for a very brief moment at the peak of the anti-war movement. Okay, that can be a basis for proceeding onwards. So that's a reason for hope.
And finally, our condolences on the loss of Carol.
Thanks.
Your life partner, someone you knew, well, you're 80, for 77 years?
Yeah, actually. Not easy to face.
What gives you the strength to go on after Carol?
Well, the kind of thing you do, for example. That makes a difference.
And you have a wonderful family.
Yeah.
So our condolences to you and your kids. Noam Chomsky, thanks so much.
Thanks.
Noam Chomsky, Professor Emeritus at MIT, leading public intellectual of our day. If you'd like to get a copy of the full interview, Part 1 and today's Part 2 with Noam Chomsky, you can go to our website at democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Berkshire, Foto Aaron Mate, Angeli Comet, Nicole Salazar, Steve Martinez, Hani Massoud. Special thanks to Dennis Moynihan, Elizabeth Press, Robbie Karen, Jessel Noor, Peter Cruz, Miguel Noguera, Mike DeFilippo, Karen Renucci, Julie Crosby, and all the staff at Democracy Now! And the team here at Link TV, Heather Herford, Molly O'Neill, Jonathan Hinton, Zoe Tollefson, Michael Smith, Keith Conti, and Jonathan Gutoff. We're in Northern California this week on our Community Voices Community Media Tour with a benefit tonight at 7:30 for KUSP Public Radio in Santa Cruz. Tuesday at noon, a benefit for Access San Francisco, that's Public Access TV. Then the San Francisco City Arts and Lectures at Herbst Theater on Tuesday night at 8. On Wednesday noon, there'll be a free public event at noon at the UC Berkeley LeConte Hall, hosted by the Peace and Conflict Studies Department. Then Wednesday night, the 60th anniversary of Pacifica Radio, KPFA in Berkeley. On Thursday, April at 7:30 p.m., we're in Palo Alto. Then on Friday, we head to Sacramento at noon, then Grass Valley, Nevada City at 7. Then we're on to New Mexico for the weekend. On Saturday, we'll go to Taos and then Santa Fe, and on Sunday at the Border Book Festival in La Cruces, Mesilla. Then on to Silver City, then to Albuquerque. And then we will go to Spokane, Washington on Monday. On Tuesday, Missoula, Montana, then to Helena and to Bozeman. I'm Amy Goodman. Our tour site is democracynow.org. Thanks so much for joining me.